Kagan on Citizens United as the Solicitor General. Let's keep in mind, and actually the reason that this came to my attention today earlier when people were asking about the role that you played when you were working as an attorney on behalf of the government. So who was your client?
The United States.
So let me go back to when Justice Kagan was in a position when she was nominated. She was a lawyer at the Department of Justice. In fact, she was the Solicitor General. As we've talked about, she argued with Citizens United. Now, she pressed the argument that the government had the authority to prevent the publication, not only of movies, but other forms of political speech, like common sense. She accounted for her arguments as Solicitor General this way, her quote, "I've tried very hard to take the cases and to make the decisions that are in the interest of my client, which is the U.S. government." My guess is that's what you were doing when you were in a different role representing the U.S. government. So I don't think there's much power to the arguments if for some reason you advocated for the government, unless we want to go back and revisit now as Supreme Court Justice's history in the same. I think that what she did was fine. Whether or not I would have voted for her, we'll never know because I wasn't here. But I also want to bring up one other thing. Another member brought up an email sent to you in 2004 where you noted that you had volunteered on a political campaign. Well, once again, you may recall that Justice Kagan also had quite a political career before she became judge. After she was nominated to the Supreme Court after reviewing her emails from the Clinton White House, the AP published a report saying that as a White House aide, she had a flair of political tactics, a flair for political tactics, and often had to place political considerations before her political views. And the LA Times reported she worked in the research department defending Democrat candidates from political attacks and conducting research on the opposition. I don't think there's much more to say about it either, except to say this. In spite of her position to think that things like common sense could actually be, banned, in spite of her political activities that seem to have reached to a far greater level than your own. When she came before this Senate, a majority of non-Republicans joined with Democrats and through unanimous consent did not force cloture. They moved on to the vote, and quite honestly, Republicans were in a position to halt her, and I'm sorry, that's on Sotomayor. On Kagan, same thing. I had the wrong sheet up. On Kagan and on Sotomayor, Republicans respected the president's authority to appoint a Supreme Court justice, and Republicans did the right thing by moving forward and allowing the confirmation. So I think that we have a moral high ground here that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle should take note of. Now I want to get to other stuff. Judge Gorsuch, I want you to go back briefly. I've got 15 minutes, and I'm going to go really quick. This will be a lightning round. The ethics class. This is another, I'm going to go back to absurdity. I appreciate that Senator Franken mentioned what he did because it's a perfect theme for my line of questions. I heard, and there's going to be a lot of it spun in the press, and I want to see if maybe a few people will actually listen to the answers to these questions. It had to do with the letters that came from the class that you teach on ethics. Can you tell me again exactly, in brief, you discussed a curriculum, a question that's raised in there. Can you very briefly, in about 45 seconds, kind of summarize that?
I can try, Senator. I'm very heartened by the fact that scores and scores of my former students have written this committee in my...
And I'm going to seek a unanimous consent to put some of those letters into the record.
And over the last 7 or 8 years, I've used the same textbook. You can take a look at the teaching manual, and you'll see exactly what we discuss.
So it wasn't an arbitrary comment. It wasn't something that was done in this one segment. It was something that was a part of a well-thought-out curriculum, and it started a discussion that I have letters that, without objection, I'd like to submit to the record that suggest the same. But it wasn't arbitrary. It wasn't off the cuff. It was something that was a part of a curriculum that had existed for how long?
7 or 8 years,
Okay.
Senator.
Okay, so I think I'd like to seek unanimous consent that I can actually put forth a series of documents that have to do with some former students, speaking specifically to the letter that you were informed of the day before yesterday, and other students that were in your class that saw the facts differently, and some other documents that I think will be good reference for the other members to review without objection. Okay, now I want to move into a couple of things that I really want to get to. The Trans Am trucking. First off, you've given me hope that I could actually understand legal opinions when I read them, when they're well written, and yours were. One of them was your dissent on Trans Am trucking. These are things, people talk, you're not here to have heart. You're here to judge the law. And you're here to judge the Constitution. And I appreciate that about you because I suspect you've got a really big heart. But I thought it interesting, I highlighted several parts in your dissent. One was when they suggested that he should drag the truck and instead of keeping it there or leaving it there, your parenthetical comment, that was an illegal and maybe sarcastically offered option. So you didn't consider that a viable option. There are going to be people here that said that you were okay with that. That's wrong. It's absurd. And then the other one was he could sit and wait for the truck to arrive, and you parenthetically said a legal if unpleasant option. You went on to say in your dissent, it might be fair to ask whether Trans Am decision was a wise or kind one, but it's not our job to answer questions like that. Our only task is to decide whether the decision was an illegal one. And then you go on to say that there is simply no law anyone has pointed giving employees the right to operate vehicles in a way the employers forbid. I think that if you go back and people read these dissents, it's hard for me to imagine that you arrived at this through any other conclusion but for the fact that Congress had not explicitly provided you the authority that you thought you need or the reference point that you thought you needed to judge otherwise. And my guess is when you rode home that night, you wish that they probably had. Now, I also thought what was interesting in your dissent on the last page is you actually, kind of gave some suggestions to maybe how things should have been done differently or how we should have done our job better so that maybe you would have in a position to come up with a different judgment. But that's our job. You told Senator Whitehouse, it's not my job to do your job. That was one of your best quotes of the hearings today. And you're absolutely right. It's our jobs to make value judgments. It's our jobs to get votes, and our jobs to answer to the American people every time we get elected or go to campaign every 2 years or 6 years. So I, for one, think that you came up with a well-reasoned, fact, legally based dissent on Trans Am trucking. Now I want to move to one that I just want to make sure I have time to get to because it's one where, quite honestly, I would have completely loved for you to go the other way, but you did the right thing.
Come on.
And it's purely by coincidence, and it really is. I'm wearing an autism pin today. Because I'm a big advocate for autism and Autism Speaks. I don't have any personal family experience with it, but it's something to me that's very important. And so, obviously, in Thompson, RJ2 School District versus Luke P., you all came up with a decision that was contrary to what I'd like to do for parents and families and children who have children with autism who are in the public school system and not getting the results that they would hope to get. And in this case, again, I think you got the IDEA absolutely right. There was not anything in the law that could have possibly led anyone. Somebody made reference to it in the opening comments. That's why I looked into it yesterday. But there's no way that you could have reached that far to support what clearly had to be, in this case, it was appeal, that would have been sympathetic to Luke P. and his parents. You made the right decision. You know what I did in North Carolina? I changed the law. I did my job. You made it very clear that the IDEA didn't do it. So as Speaker of the House, we went in there, and when we said that a parent, after spending a year in public school, didn't think that their child was getting what they needed, then we would actually allow them to go to a private school and have money follow them so they can do it. So by doing my job, we've got a few hundred kids now who are getting the education that they need in a private school setting. Thank you for forcing me to do my job. It preceded my time as Speaker of the House, but we knew we'd run into problems there, and we solved the problem. Jeez. Thank you for making us do our jobs. And then finally, the case, I want to go back to this real quick to make sure I get my notes right. Oh, speaking or talking against, one thing I like about you is sometimes your decisions seem to make everybody mad, which is probably means it's a pretty good decision. So I think sometimes maybe you even exceed the 50% rule. Like the case in
my daughters would agree with you.
Like the case in Riddle versus Hickenlooper. I mean, that's a position where the Democrats and the Republicans were spitting mad at you. Mm-hmm. And there aren't many more. I mean, when you put every other minority party that was being treated unfairly as a result of actions that were taken. I don't know if it were Democrats or Republicans in control when they passed that. But that was a classic example where you obeyed the law. The other thing that was interesting, or you